The lights fall in gold and white across the stage, and for a moment, just a moment, the world seems to hold its breath. 50,000 voices have gathered in the warm Italian night, and they are waiting. The orchestra swells beneath a sky that looks almost too cinematic to be real, and then he steps forward. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of effortless elegance that cannot be taught, Gianluca Ginoble opens his mouth and fills the air with sound so rich, so full, so aching with feeling, that grown adults in the front rows press their hands to their chests as if physically moved. This is Il Volo in full flight. And Gianluca, the baritone at the center of the trio's sound, the young man from Roseto degli Abruzzi, who grew up along the Adriatic coast, is, without question, one of the most admired young performers in the classical crossover world. He is beloved by millions. He is celebrated on stages from Buenos Aires to Tokyo. He has sung at the Sanremo Festival and shared the spotlight with legends. And yet, despite all of this, a quiet question follows him through fan forums, social media threads, and hushed conversations at the stage door. Why is someone so gifted, so charming, so seemingly complete, still single? It is the kind of question that reveals as much about those asking it as it does about the man at its center. But it is worth exploring, not with the breathless curiosity of gossip, but with the patience and care that Gianluca himself seems to bring to every note he sings. Because the answer, if there is one, is layered. It is woven into his childhood, his career, his character, and the peculiar, beautiful, occasionally isolating life of a global performer who grew up in public, but has always chosen to keep his most private self entirely his own. To understand Gianluca Ginoble today, you have to go back to the beginning, not to the grand stages, but to the small Italian town where it all started. Roseto degli Abruzzi is a modest coastal town on Italy's Adriatic shore, the kind of place where families gather on summer evenings along the Lungomare, where the smell of the sea mingles with the sound of children playing, and where music is not a performance, but a way of life. It was here that Gianluca was born in February 1995, and it was here that his voice first announced itself to the world, or at least to the small, warm world of his family and community. He was young when his gifts became evident, the kind of natural talent that stands out even in a country as musically rich as Italy. By the time he was 15, he had caught the attention of the producers behind Ti lascio una canzone, the Italian television talent program that would change his life entirely. It was there, in 2009 and 2010, that he was paired with two other extraordinary young voices: the fiery, exuberant Ignazio Boschetto from Bologna, and the technically precise and deeply passionate Piero Barone from Naro in Sicily. Together under the name Il Volo, Italian for the flight, they became something that Italian television had not quite seen before. Three teenage boys singing operatic classical crossover music, with the confidence and command of artists twice their age. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Il Volo became a phenomenon almost overnight, not just in Italy, but internationally, particularly in Latin America and the United States, where their blend of classical technique and popular emotion found an audience hungry for something more substantial than the pop charts offered. They appeared on American television, recorded albums that charted worldwide, and within a few years of their formation had performed at venues that most musicians spend lifetimes hoping to reach. Gianluca was, at this point, barely out of adolescence. And this is the first and perhaps most foundational part of any honest answer to the question of his romantic life. He grew up not in relative obscurity, not with the slow, private accumulation of experience that most people take for granted, but squarely in the center of an international spotlight. The years in which most young people are learning how to navigate friendships, heartbreak, and the awkward architecture of early love were, for Gianluca, spent on tour buses, in recording studios, in the glare of television cameras, and in the company of thousands of adoring strangers. Fame is a strange thing to grow up inside. It gives you the world and, in the same gesture, makes the world feel slightly unreal. There's a particular kind of emotional displacement that can come from living at the pace of a global music career in your formative years. Psychologists who work with young performers often note that the relentless rhythm of performance, travel, public engagement, and professional pressure can create a kind of emotional lag, a situation in which a person's public self develops far faster than their private emotional life can keep up with. Gianluca has never spoken about this in clinical terms, of course, but those who have followed his journey closely can see its contours in the quiet, thoughtful manner with which he approaches his personal life. He is, by almost every account, a deeply private person. In interviews, he is warm and engaged, possessed of a dry humor and an easy smile. But he guards the inner territory of his emotional life with a care that speaks not of coldness, but of genuine self-awareness. He knows what it means to be observed. He has known it since he was 15 years old, and perhaps because of that, he holds his private world close, not as a secret exactly, but as something precious that belongs to him alone. The Il Volo touring schedule alone is enough to strain almost any personal relationship. In their peak years, the trio has logged hundreds of performances annually, crossing continents with the frequency of migrating birds. A relationship conducted against that backdrop, the perpetual motion, the jet lag, the emotional intensity of performance, followed immediately by the emotional flatness of airports and hotel rooms, demands a particular kind of partner, someone who can be present across distance, who can hold a relationship together through absence, who understands that the man they love is also, in some essential way, always partly elsewhere. This is not unique to Gianluca, of course. Ignazio Boschetto and Piero Barone have navigated similar terrain, each finding their own way through the intersection of public career and private life. But Gianluca's response to the challenge has been distinctive. Where some performers in his position have pursued relationships publicly, weaving their romantic lives into their public narrative, Gianluca has consistently and quietly chosen a different path, one of discretion, of privacy, of letting his art speak while keeping his heart to himself. Perhaps the most telling thing about Gianluca Ginoble is not what he shares, but what he chooses not to. The fan community around Il Volo is, it must be said, one of the most devoted in the classical crossover world. Predominantly female, spanning multiple generations and distributed across every continent where Italian music has found an audience, these fans follow the trio with an attention and loyalty that converge on the familial. They know Gianluca's vocal range, his favorite foods, the names of his family members, the town where he grew up. They follow his social media with the focused attentiveness of biographers. And among this community, the question of his relationship status has long been a source of fascination, and for many, something closer to a quiet, collective hope. There is a particular dynamic that exists between certain kinds of performers and their audiences, one where the performer, by virtue of their art and their public presence, becomes a projection screen for the audience's deepest longings. And when that performer is young, handsome, elegant, and single, the projection intensifies. Gianluca, whether he fully reckons with it or not, has become for many of his fans not just a singer, but a symbol of romantic possibility, of the kind of love that might be worthy of such a voice. He handles this with what can only be described as grace. He's neither cruel in his distance nor dishonest in his warmth. He signs autographs with patience, poses for photographs with genuine pleasure, and engages with fans in a way that feels authentic rather than performed. But he does not offer them his romantic life. He does not use it as content, does not deploy it as a narrative device, does not allow speculation about it to be answered by the convenient leaks and strategic glimpses that have become standard tools of celebrity management in the social media age. This choice, and it is clearly a deliberate choice, says something important about who Gianluca Ginoble is as a person. In an era when celebrity culture has collapsed the distance between public performance and private life almost entirely. When the boundary between what is performed and what is lived has become nearly invisible, he has quietly maintained a wall. Not an aggressive wall, not a defensive one, but a simple, clear, dignified one. This is mine, it seems to say. This is not for the stage. And then there is the question of timing, which may, in the end, be the most honest answer of all. Gianluca Ginoble is, in the context of human life, still a young man. He has spent the last 15 years at the epicenter of an international music career, growing up not in the ordinary way, but in the peculiar, accelerated, and sometimes distorting environment of global performance. There are certain kinds of growing up that fame delays rather than hastens, certain kinds of emotional maturity that can only be achieved in the quiet spaces that fame tends to crowd out. It is also worth noting that the world of classical and operatic performance has its own particular relationship with time. It is a world that rewards patience, that prizes depth over immediacy, that understands that the most extraordinary things, the perfect phrase, the ideal interpretation, the moment when technique and feeling become indistinguishable, cannot be rushed. Gianluca has absorbed this understanding deeply. It is audible in the way he sings, in the measured quality of his performances, in the sense he gives of a man who has never quite finished becoming himself. Perhaps it is not surprising that he brings the same patience to his personal life. There is also, it must be acknowledged, the simple and unglamorous reality of compatibility. The question of who is available, who is truly suited, who can navigate the peculiarities of a life like Gianluca's is not a small one. The pool of people who could genuinely understand what it means to live the way he lives, always in motion, always observed, always partly claimed by the public, is not large. Finding someone within that pool who also happens to be the right person, at the right time, in the right emotional season of both their lives, is not the work of a moment. It is the work of years, and it requires a kind of luck that does not respond to scheduling. Fame creates proximity with the world and distance from it simultaneously. It is possible to be known by millions and understood by almost no one. There is a loneliness that attaches itself to certain kinds of success, not the crushing loneliness of isolation, but the more subtle, harder to name loneliness of a person who moves through crowded rooms, always slightly apart from them. Gianluca has never spoken about loneliness directly, and it would be wrong to project it onto him without his own words to guide us. But the structural conditions of his life, the constant travel, the professional intensity, the performance of intimacy for audiences without the reality of intimacy in private, are conditions that many performers describe in retrospect as having made genuine personal connection more difficult than they expected. What is striking about Gianluca, watching him across interviews and performances and the small, candid moments that fans capture and share, is that he does not appear diminished by any of this. He appears rather like a man who has found a way to live richly and fully within the particular constraints and freedoms of his life. He is close to his family, deeply rooted in his Italian identity, clearly sustained by his friendships, most especially by the bond with Ignazio and Piero, which is, by any measure, one of the more remarkable relationships in contemporary music. The three of them have grown up together in a way that is almost without parallel in popular music. They were brought together as teenagers, by circumstance and talent, and they have remained together through the full arc of early adulthood. Through the awkwardness of fame arriving before maturity, through the difficulties of creative and personal evolution, through all the pressures that have fractured other groups long before they reached a decade together. The loyalty between them, the genuine affection that is visible whenever they are on stage or in conversation, speaks to a capacity in Gianluca for deep and lasting connection. It suggests that his apparent solitude is not an inability to attach, but a choice about when and how to do so. The real question was never why Gianluca Ginoble is still single. The real question is what kind of life he is building, and why it looks, from the outside, like such a deliberate and considered one. Standing backstage after a performance, before the applause has fully subsided, and while the orchestra is still settling into silence, There's a moment that performers often describe as one of the most disorienting of the night. You have just given everything, every breath, every phrase, every ounce of emotional truth you possess, to a room full of strangers. They have received it. They have responded. The connection has been real. And then it is over, and you are standing alone in the wings, and the room empties, and you are just a person again. Gianluca Ginoble has lived inside that rhythm for 15 years. He knows what it is to be claimed by an audience and then returned to himself. He knows what it is to be loved at scale by millions across continents in languages he does not speak, and to carry that love carefully without letting it become a substitute for something quieter and more specific and more truly his. Perhaps this is why he is single, not because he is incapable of love or uninterested in it, or too devoted to his career to make room for it, but because he understands, at some level, that the performances themselves seem to express the difference between being seen and being known. And he is waiting, patiently, with the long game patience of a man trained in an art form that rewards those who do not hurry, for the latter. Or perhaps the answer is simpler than all of this. Perhaps he is single, because the right person has not yet arrived, and he is too honest, too private, too unwilling to perform emotion he does not feel, to pretend otherwise. In a world that demands constant romantic narrative from its performers, that insistence on authenticity is itself a form of quiet courage. The lights come up again. The orchestra draws a breath, and Gianluca Ginoble steps forward into the gold and white of the stage. And the world, the whole enormous, adoring, speculating, wondering world, holds its breath once more. Whatever the real reason, the truth seems to be this. Gianluca Ginoble is a man living his life on his own terms, at his own pace, with his own understanding of what matters and what can wait. He has given the world his voice, one of the most beautiful of his generation, and his time, and his extraordinary talent. The rest of it, the quiet and the private and the romantic and the personal, belongs to him. And in that choice, in that dignified and graceful refusal to surrender all of himself to the spectacle of public life, there is something worth more than any answer to the question people keep asking. The real story is not why Gianluca Ginoble is still single. The real story is the life he is quietly, deliberately, and beautifully building. One performance, 1 year, one private moment at a time. And if that life eventually includes the love his fans so fervently hope for him, it will be a love chosen freely, away from the cameras, in the unhurried fullness of his own time. Some things, after all, are worth waiting for.